Okay, the first building we have here is 11 Times Square, which is FX Fowl, 2010. I think they're still finishing the bottom floor, and they haven't found tenants for it. It doesn't quite look like it's rendering. The rendering had a giant orb. They call them spectaculars in Times Square, and this had this amazing orb on the north side, but I don't think anybody's going to build it that way. As you can see, it fits in with the height of Midtown, which is generally about 40 to 50 stories. You can see the New York Times building with it also. Would you like to say that?
Yeah, photographing buildings like this, in fact, any of the skyscrapers in New York, but particularly in the Times Square area, is always a challenge because if you can't get back far enough, or when you get back far enough, then it shows many other buildings, many other elements. What I looked at this building for quite a while. Even you will see later a photograph of the New York Times Tower, which is taken from the low roof of the Westin Hotel at Times Square, which is in fact not really Times Square at all. It's at 43rd Street and 8th Avenue. But this building is unusual in that the north facade of the building slopes outwards from its base. So it has the opposite effect that you sometimes get in photography, where as you tilt your camera backwards, the building recedes. This one doesn't recede. But I was, of course, careful in this instance to keep my camera level, which is the key in architectural photography to keeping the verticals truly vertical. And the only way I was able to take a photograph like that was with the aid of one of Canon's latest 17mm tilt shift lenses. And this is the widest lens of this kind that is currently available. Very expensive. And without that particular piece of equipment, this would have been next to impossible task. So this is an example of very wide angle. And I mean, if you went to this spot with a normal camera, you'd say, wow, how did I get that? Well, that's how.
One other thing this slide shows is that 8th Avenue has really become glamorous in terms of architecture. It's got some real showpieces on it now, including the Westin, the New York Times building, the one we see there, and then further uptown there's the Hearst Tower and the Time Warner building. So the glamour of Midtown is expanding outward. Next.
Anybody that's in the vicinity of that first building there, walk around to the south entrance, because in the lobby is a marvelous mobile by the architect sculptor Tim Prentice. It's not yet open to the public, but you can even see it from the outside. It's really very nice.
This is the New York Times building by Renzo Piano from 2007. His explanation of the building was that he wanted it to dematerialize as it reached the top. So it becomes very abstract with just kind of fencing at the top. And it's also kind of a metaphor for the New York Times, which previously was the authority and sort of the impenetrable and the only voice for news, but now everything is transparent. And they mean that metaphorically too, that people can use the web and, correspond with people who work for the Times.
This photograph you can no longer take, because the building that you just saw previously is between my vantage point and this So there was a construction site in the foreground, and this is one of these, in a way, it's a sort of a trick of digital photography, where you take a range of exposures from light to dark, and you combine them in a single image, so that this photograph is not the way it looked when I took it. It's been computerized, and that's why you see all the sunset, and yet you see into the building. So you've got a whole combination of different elements there that would otherwise not be visible in a single picture.
The real showpiece of the building is the lobby, which is a white wood floor. But the working floors are kind of monotonous. Each one looks exactly alike. And I think it doesn't do what architects always say they're trying to do, which is form follows function. You know, the function of a newspaper is to communicate. And to do that, we have to have people within it communicate. But this building is designed with tiers that stick out, and the elevator actually takes up the central space to a greater degree. So people tend to email each other rather than actually interact. So it's not really designed for a newspaper. So.
And Eric knows, because Eric worked in that building. How long?
Well, I worked there since it opened in 2007. Next picture. This is 100 Park Avenue.
Yeah, it's either 100 or 120.
Oh, which one is this?
Yeah. I think it's maybe 120 Park.
No, it's
Is that 100?
Elijah Front.
Yeah. And this is a throwback, because this is one of the earlier buildings in the coverage. And it's very interesting to look back at these and see how some of these buildings have stood the test of time. And I think this one still looks pretty damn nice.
What's interesting about it historically is it's the first big building that was built after World War II. And you can see a lot of trends that shape the future of the city. For one thing, they had fluorescent lighting, so you no longer needed this code that said you had to be within 24 feet of a window to have adequate light. Now they could just have all offices as deep as they wanted into the building. And another advent was air conditioning. So you also were able to have very large sealed spaces.
But it still follows the 1916 zoning law.
Yeah.
Pyramid.
It is a pyramid, but you can tell that it's getting bulkier.
Where my Park Avenue? 40th, between 40th and 41st.
40.
So this building almost needs no introduction. It's the Flatiron Building, which has been the subject of many classic photos. It's inspired a lot of people, and for many, it's actually their favorite skyscraper in New York.
It was the subject of our August book talk, as a matter
Oh,
of fact.
okay.
Alex Alexiou's book on the Flatiron, which is still in our bookstore if anybody wants to buy it.
It's Daniel Burnham who said, make no small plans, so they don't stir men's hearts. So, this is kind of a great trick building because it's a steel frame inside, a triangular steel frame with very heavy masonry on the front of it. So you sort of wonder how it stands up. And at certain angles, it almost looks like a sheer wall. So it's a wonderful building to experience from all sides.
It's a particularly difficult building to photograph because when you get close to it, it's got a very massive pediment at the top there, the corners. And when you get close to it, it becomes really exaggerated at that point up there. It's rounded this end, although you don't see it in this light. And it really dominates the facade to a major extent. And getting the proportion right, you really have to be somewhat distant from the building to get the nicest views. And what I did here was I aligned myself with the western facade of the building. You can see the cornice line at the top there, but you don't actually see the western facade. So it looks like it's an infinitely thin building. I've taken shots of the facade here that you see on the left here, just looking up at it, and you would not recognize that building. It just doesn't, you don't, when you don't see and feel that shape there, we're so used to seeing photographs of it from that angle that when you see it from a different angle, you don't recognize it. It looks like a piece of furniture.
Let's see, here we have the GE building, which was originally the RCA building. And this is when architecture sort of was at its romantic peak. Architects could really express themselves in terms of what the building was for and how it was used. These are literally the gods of radio at the top of the building, these giant heads sending out magnetic waves. And even the lintels they're not too clear here, but those represent record needles because RCA have the record business also. And the lobby is also fun to go into also because it has this sort of pan to radio, power of radio.
Yeah, it's probably, the top of that building is probably the most elaborate building that I can think of in Manhattan. And it's a shame that you can't get closer to it. You know, here I think I was on the top of the Waldorf Astoria, which is just south of it. And it's, you don't often see it as clearly as this, unless you take a very prominent. And it's worth doing that, because it's very, very elaborate. It's very sculptural.
There are two contextual things about it that are really wonderful. One is coming out of the 51st Street in Lexington subway. What you see is this building, so you really feel the height of it. And secondly, there's St. Bartholomew's Church right below it. And I think the architects were careful to make it contextual. It's a similar color, and it goes well with the dome shape. So I think they had both of those things in mind. Next slide. Okay, here we have the Bank of America Tower, which is on Bryant Park. It billed itself as the greenest building in New York when we built it, and it has all kinds of features like gray water. They reuse the air conditioning water. The skin is a certain response to sunlight, so that the shades go up and down automatically to make sure that there's an equal level of light, and they recircle the air frequently through floor vents. They were one of the first to do this, but it's really become standard in the industry now.
Yeah, this was taken obviously above street level. That green that you see at the base of this was in fact a temporary sidewalk barricade before they finished the street level. So that had nothing to do with the fact that it's supposed to be rebuilt. But what I particularly like about the facade is that the window detail. Now it's probably weren't any tenants in it at this stage, but it looks very uniform, and I love that change that occurs, like that seam in the middle of it there, because they're not in the same plane. Those two facades there at the base of the building, they become the same further up, and then it does different things. It's very, very, very interesting from the standpoint of its form. It's very complex, and it's also a very recognizable. You know, you see it from different vantage points, and you know immediately what it is. And it's a very large building.
And it also gracefully complements the park. The subway station is very open and it doesn't dominate on the park as some feared was going on.
Yeah, it almost extends the park. So it sort of opens up that side. It was a very undistinguished series of buildings there before. It needed that hole needed plugging, and this one did an excellent job.
Here we have the original or old Buchanan Tower, which was first called the Pan-Hellenic Club, and it was for a sorority to live in it, kind of dorm. It's really a powerful example of sheerly up and then into a cascade of setbacks. New York skyscrapers can loosely be divided into several eras. The first is appropriately called the eclectic era, when they really built all kinds of different buildings with classical tops, with Greek motifs. There was a lot of copying too. The Metropolitan Life Insurance building resembled the Duomo in St. Mark's, Venice. So that was the eclectic period, and then the zoning code came in, where the buildings had to allow a certain amount of sunlight onto the street. You can see why this problem existed if you look on Pine Street, right off of Broadway. The sun never strikes that street, it's always in shadow, and the buildings rise just like the Grand Canyon on either side of the street. So the city got together and decided that they needed to set back the buildings to allow the sun at certain hours to hit the street. Then you get the post-war international style, like the United Nations building. Then you get postmodern buildings, which are actually sort of old hat, I think. They're not the latest word. What we see is contemporary architecture. It doesn't have a name other than that. I think with enough time and distance, people will give it a name.
I have a particular soft spot for this building, not particularly because of its architecture, but when I came to America first from Ireland, where I grew up in 1956, I was taken up to the bar that they had at the very top of that. Was one of the first high vantage points that I was taken to, and at that time, this building here, the United Nations Club, didn't exist, and so it was a particularly nice spot, and I just always associated with my very early days in New York, and I believe it's still open. I'm not sure about that.
Yes, it is. And it really is one of the most romantic spots, sort of out of the Great Gatsby, because you see the lights of the avenue. It captures the whole feeling of the year. Next, please. This is the Bloomberg building, which is not especially tall. I think it's under 55 stories. But it stands out very much because of its location on the east side, which doesn't have that many skyscrapers, and is trying to keep it that way. Celebrities, including Woody Allen, have written to the mayor to not build tall buildings on the east side, but it will probably move along the course that 8th Avenue did, and there will be more and more skyscrapers. This is by Cesar Pelle, who also did the smaller buildings of the World Trade Center that surrounded the old building. Yes, the World Financial.
Yeah, this is a very wide angle shot. I wasn't that far. It was an above ground vantage point, but I still needed to use my widest angle lens. And when I took this picture, the building that I was shooting from was under construction. And there was all along the left-hand side there was a temporary hoist, which we had to retouch. But it did have, as you can see, a very dramatic sky. And that's always something that I hope for, but it doesn't always happen.
Another feature is it's a multi-use building, part residential. And the residential part has this, I forget the exact geometric term for it, but it's an upside down cone, basically. So if you go in there, the walls tilt away from you, but they're circular. So it's worth seeing, but they'll shoo you out.
Yeah, it's a very unfriendly building. Photographers, they won't let you anywhere near it. It's got a pass-through that goes between adjacent streets there, but they won't let you. I mean, you sort of take your life and sort of walk through it.
Here we have the Condé Nast building. This was one of the first of the new wave of Times Square buildings that used electronic light displays. There's a huge drum here which shows television pictures that move across it. You can actually be quite dizzy if you look at the building. If the images are moving rapidly in front of you. Again, it follows the sort of theme of Times Square. There was a graphic designer named Timur Kalman who designed the Barnes and Noble book bag, if you know that image. But he set up codes for how large the signs should be relative to the street level. And this building follows a lot of those codes, and it's sort of a showpiece. Inside there's a Frank Gehry cafeteria, but it doesn't take cash, so you need an employee ID to go there.
Yeah, this building has always been a bit of a puzzle as far as I'm concerned, because from different aspects, it looks totally different from when you see it from across 42nd Street. It looks different when you see it from the east. It looks different when you see it from this direction. And it's like it's a series of separate elements, and that I'm not sure hang together very well. But certainly what happens on that drum there, this particular view of it, that's one of the counter projections. Because, I mean, at times it really shouts at you. And the images move terribly fast, so it's very, very difficult to ignore it. But it makes photographing it, certainly at night, it's so bright that you have to be very careful taking pictures. I also don't like all that stuff that goes on top. It looks very clumsy to me.
I guess this would still be considered a postmodern building because of that flash. That's what the architects were going for with the early stages of postmodernism, was to have things that don't fit together right next to each other and to sort of generate excitement that way.
It may generate excitement, but I'm not sure it generates architectural quality.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I read that NASDAQ, what do you call it, the circle there, but originally was without windows. And when they moved in, the people said, hey, we don't have any windows to work by. And that's when they got
I think I remember something like that. So it gives it a sort of fortress-like appearance. But every now and again, they have something projected on that seems to fit in those windows. I mean, they convert the whole thing to brick, red brick, and things like that. So it's not without some venture.
And I like also what they're doing with Times Square, which is turning it into more of a spectator's area, the way they're blocking off some of the lanes and some of the avenues. They realize that people come there to stop and stare, and the cars are a real hazard. You have that become an issue. Next, please. Well, this is more.
Yeah, this was a panorama taken from the top of the Empire State Building, and this was a pre-digital panorama, so it was actually taken with a panoramic camera, a great big negative, 6.75 inches long. So this was subsequently digitized. I've had one print of this made in three panels, and each panel is 4 feet square. So
Is that looking north? That's the price
yes,
of the building over
yes,
there?
yeah, that's what. So a number of Manhattan skyscrapers that are in the book are in this photograph.
Yeah, you can see the Citibank over there.
The Chrysler building on the extreme right.
That's 500.
And I may have taken this before 425 Fifth Avenue, which is the Michael Graves building, which is in the latest edition. That would be down here on the right, sort of right in that gap there.
Before the biggest crowd?
Well, and also before Bank of America, which would be quite prominent.
Next. Here we have the Ernst and Young building and Reuter together. And this is more of that sort of kind of postmodern, kind of contemporary building that's going on. You can see that the emphasis is on large amounts of floor space. That's what companies care about now because of the way the computer wires need to run everywhere. And you also don't have people working the way they used to. Basically, if you've ever seen old photos of offices, they have long lines of typists working together, like a steno pool. Movie the apartment, you would see that, or something like Mad Men would have that also. They want greater space and they want more room for electronics.
Yeah, this pinpoints the near impossibility of focusing on any one building in this area, unless you get right on top of it, and then it becomes very distorted. I apologize a little bit because these photographs are sharp, but this is a rather small file size because we want to get it all onto a CD. So, but Reuters is another building like the Condé Nast that's got a whole series of separate elements, and it looks like different buildings from different angles. It's just got so many different styles. It's the one that you see there with that sort of fin on the top, which earlier on had a nice neon light going right around the edge of that. That doesn't work anymore.
Next. Here we have the Grace Building right on Bryant Park. This is 1973, Gordon Bunshaft. And I think Bunshaft was really looking for ways to go beyond the glass box. He designed some of the most beautiful glass boxes that exist, like Lever House. But I think he wanted to stretch things a little. So this is kind of a one-trick pony in that it slants away from you, so there's a kind of overwhelming effect as you look up from the street. But otherwise, it's a very plain top, and the bulk of the building is nothing extraordinary either. He did the same trick at 9 West 57th Street also. So if you ever wondered about the similarities.
Yeah, it's funny. I previously always looked at this building from the opposite direction, and there was another slide up from the other side there. Slide. But once they completed the renovation of the building behind me when I shot this, the nice wide sidewalk, and I could get back on with my new trick back, and was able to get the whole building in, so it provided me with a new view of this.
Here we have the Time Warner building, which I think grows on. If you spend a lot of time in the area, you start to notice nice things about it. It looks like a bit of a position at the beginning, but it really was well thought out in a number of ways. It's a great transition from the glass boxes of the Midtown to the stone residential area along the west side. You often see twin towers in the west side apartments, so I think the twin towers is sort of an echo of that. It conforms to the curve of the circle, and the circle itself has been redone with fountains, so people actually do spend time there. It's a pleasant locale. The skin is very reflective and often disappears against certain types of sky. And it doesn't look so cumbersome because the angles are kind of sharp, so they look like planes rather than bulk as you stand by it.
Yeah, looking at that left-hand tower in particular there, it looks as though in plan that would be fairly close to a square. In fact, actually, it's a parallelogram. And it's only because it's taken with a wide-angle lens from this particular angle, and that right-hand side of the left tower there goes at an angle which looks very normal, only because it's not. So it's and you see the tower on the right there. You would expect to see something of the right-hand facade, but you don't, because it's because of its shape. And I can't resist mentioning there's a little shelf that you see up there on the right-hand tower and on the left, right near the top. That's the 76th floor, and a book that I just finished New York terraces, and that terrace is one of the featured terraces, and it's the highest terrace in the book, and it looks right down practically plan view of Lincoln Center, and it is really quite scary. It's got a big hefty parapet, but then below the parapet it's got glass. It's really something. And it was so windy when I took photographs of it the last time that the terrace was almost unusable, or else going to get blown off.
Is it a residential chair?
Yes. Yeah. It's a nice little duplex apartment. Cost the owners $23 million, and then they spent another 14 renovating. New building money.
Is that the fountain? I'm trying to get my bearings.
This is the fountain in the corner of Central Park. Yeah.
Well, that's the statue. We don't quite have the fountain built yet.
Yeah, I think they may have been.
The pylon of crystal.
Well, actually when it's windy, they turn on.
And in case you ever wondered, when they measure distance in New York City, this is the point they measure to. So you sort of,
Columbus.
Yeah.
yeah.
Anybody that tries to photograph this tower with whatever equipment, that you want to avoid a cloudless sunny day, because when it's a cloudless sunny day, those towers just look very monotonous and very neat and calm. They don't seem to have any depth. So it's really much better on a day like this one here, where you see different clouds reflected in the facade, and they add great interest to the building that it lacks in a clear blue sky.
A friend of mine is a fan of escalators, actually. It's an interesting of sort of pursuit. And this has one of the greatest escalators in the city. And when you come out from Whole Foods, I always hear the riding of Valkyries because you're running straight up into this window.
Yeah, that window, incidentally, there is, I think it's the largest single panel of glazing of its size in the world, and it has literally no lines. It's got, it's got just cables and little tiny joints between them. And it was the work of James Carpenter, the architect consultant. And it's that detail alone is worth a visit to that building. This isn't in the building. This isn't in the building.
Yeah, this is the new Geary building.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think it's called Beekman Tower, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it's calling it Beekman Tower. It's already Beekman Tower South. It's on Main Street. Anyway, it's the facade is only just been finished, and of all the buildings in New York, I can't think of one that owes more to its the texture of it, changing light. It just looks totally different at different under different lighting conditions. I did a time lapse of it the other day with clouds coming over, and 1 minute in shadow, and it's just amazing. Or parts of the building bright, brightly lit, part in shadow.
What material is the skin?
It's whether it's titanium or stainless steel
I
or.
think it's usually titanium.
Yeah, I think that Frank Gehry has a great loving for titanium skin, so it's.
I think it's stainless.
Oh.
It is titanium. So I don't really know.
But it's metal.
It's certainly that.
We value engineering.
And it's also very reflective. That when the sun strikes it at certain angles, you really, really bright.
Gary often uses dance as a metaphor for his architecture. He called two towers he built in Europe the Fred and Ginger buildings. So I think it's okay to sort of run wild with metaphors here and say that looks like a 1920s building, sort of dancing, kind of a flapper.
I don't understand why he left the facade of the building at the left, facing south, actually. It's absolutely plain.
I was told it was value engineering.
They ran out of money on that side.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the north, east, and west sides of the building are all faceted like this, and they're very interesting. And the south facade is not very interesting.
Is there any kind of function or engineering to it, or is it purely just design elements, the whole skin?
The building shape, I think in plan, is quite correct. It's very simple. And it's just that the projections on each core floor change. And then you've got this elaborate facade which then attaches to this and changes
Also,
at each level.
you don't get a sense from the inside of any of it?
I haven't been inside, so I don't know how much of that is actual floor space or if it's balcony or what. No, it's got to be floor space. They don't look like they're any balcony.
It's very simple. It's just the concrete slabs are just slightly projected, and so
I mean, it's a very clever way of producing what looks like a very complicated facade. But it was not all that complicated, I think, to make it. I mean, much less complicated than something like the Disney Wall or something like that. The basic floor plan is really quite straightforward.
I think it affects the fenestration, the size of the windows and the curvature of the frames of the windows also.
Yeah, but it's interesting too because I mean the parts of it that are less undulated, the windows do look the same size, don't they? I don't know what happens in those very curved places. I'll have to go and get a tour. Are the windows curved as well? I don't know.
think
I
they
doubt
are. No, I think they are.
Are they?
They're different sizes.
Must be one
Frank,
expensive
that's on
building.
Sorry.
Must be one expensive building.
Well, yeah, it must have been. And one reason that it didn't make it into this edition was that at one point they were going to stop it at the 35th floor and wait for a better economy. They changed their minds and continued on, fortunately. But I mean, at that point, I think that we eliminated it, didn't we?
Yeah.
How tall is
So we're 76
stories.
Very cool.
Is it less
Guys,
than the
right,
Woodward's building?
it? Oh, it's much taller.
It is? Oh, that's not good.
Oh, yeah. At least from what I looked at.
They're from certain angles, you can get both it and the Woolworth building in the same photograph. There's some interesting dialogue between the two. They're not all that different in height, but they're sure different in architecture.
Next. Oh, here we have Times Square again at night. And you can see how kinetic it's all become. It's really more about the spectaculars than it is about the buildings at night. They disappear and it becomes like a giant television set.
Yeah, what was very difficult about this is that the building that I was photographing was actually the dark silhouette that you see in the background, not the neon lit of the completely advertisement clad building in the foreground, which projects against it. So I had to be quite a long way away. I was up near where the red steps are now. And to do this photograph, that's why I was somewhat elevated there. And then you can see the shape of it, but it doesn't explain it very well.
But Times Square has been, since its beginning, really a honky-tonk kind of atmosphere. You can see a little bit of the Paramount building with the globe on top. And that's a classic deco with a cascade of setbacks and a clock also, which tells the right time actually. Here we have the Grace building again from a different angle. You see more of the sweep of the building here. And this is how you experience it at the street level. The piers come down straight through the cornice here. And so it draws your eye up immediately to the facade.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is here that there are some optical things that happen as you travel up the building here. It does something strange. You think at the minute that the things don't quite line up the way they should. And then you're not quite sure then when verticals are also twisted. It's an optical illusion.
Next, please. Here's the Standard Hotel, which I think is just terrific. This is what we would call contemporary architecture, but it's a tribute to so many different kinds of architecture. And not a tribute, but a starting point, taking off from it. You can see the international style windows, but they're of different colors and they vary more. And you see what was once Morris Lapidus with the Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue. And he was sort of laughed at as a Miami architect because his hotel resembled an open book. And this one does too, so I think this is kind of a vindication of Lapidus. It goes into so many different architectural forms. There's just raw concrete on the base, you would expect something finished here, but instead you see the raw concrete with the board imprints still in them. And it's, the whole High Line, I think, is a very successful park. There's a wonderful breezeway through this building, and people actually, they're mobile chairs, and people actually take them out and just sit in the breezeway.
This is at the southern end of the High Line. Many of you that have not seen High Line, that's an absolute must. This was taken with a pretty wide angle lens, and even though I kept my verticals vertical, when I looked at this afterwards, I realized that this upper right-hand side was really very, very sharp angle. It looks and is to an extent distorted. The buildings, I mean, that's a right angle at the top there, although it certainly doesn't look like it from this. So the photograph that you see illustrated in the book, I have corrected some of that because instead of shifting my lens up straight, I shifted it on an angle, so I was able to turn the camera and correct some of that extreme horizontal there and make it less extreme. If you look at the book afterwards and compare it with this view, you'll see that quite clearly.
Next, please. I think this is our last image. This is the Westin Hotel, designed by Architectonica, which is based in Miami. And Miranda Spears was the chief architect. And her mentor, she says, was Robert A.M. Stern. When this came out, one critic said it was the ugliest skin of the building in Manhattan. And
You're not going to name it.
and it was criticized for being too tropical and that kind of architecture should be kept in Miami. But it was actually the design specifically for that site. It wasn't a carryover. Her original sketches were very similar to it. There's some sort of complicated analogy between earth and sky here, separated by a comet streak. And then this is a totally postmodern base there with square windows but within a very jagged shape. So it's been criticized a lot, and it's a little hard to warm up to. I don't know how successful. They call these, see the different blue stripes there, they call those brush strokes, and also the horizontal ones. And I don't know if they were entirely successful with that. But,
Certainly looks very digital.
yeah, it does, actually.
Yeah, I think that the designing in this particular area of the city, where they have to, by code, provide, I think, almost the equivalent of 3 stories of facade for advertising and billboards, makes it extremely difficult to come up with a piece of architecture that holds together in any way. You can't get this view anymore because 11 Times Square is right in the way now of this shop. It occupies the corner that was open. So you now have to get onto a more extreme angle on this. And I had a lot of trouble getting this, because I photographed the Westin Hotel before Architectonica. And they were very anxious to get this stripe at dusk. So I went at dusk and Dan White didn't come on. So I had to pull him up and I said, look, you're going to have to arrange to get this thing turned on earlier. So I went a second time, and still, about the third time I said, oh, okay, I'm just going to take photographs when I think the facade looks fine, and then when the stripe comes on. And the big problem is that with all the advertising that you see at the base there, that's all very, very bright at dusk. I mean, it just overpowers everything. And this wretched stripe doesn't come on until it's too dark to see the facade. So we had to take photographs and and work on that to put that strike in afterwards on a photograph that had been taken earlier. And then we had to play around with all the cars here, which, interestingly enough, when Hugh Hardy saw this photograph there, he just loved the sort of accidental quality. It wasn't accidental. It was, I couldn't clear 8th Avenue, but he just liked that, and I got an assignment from Hugh as a result of that. But we had to tone down this van here was very, very light colors, so that had to be toned down. So that you didn't. That wasn't the first thing that you put in the photograph, but it was a big problem to photograph.
Well, that's it. So we have to go ahead to question if you want.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's the Hearst Tower. I think this is all a wonderful postmodern building, and it literally just crashes two pieces of architecture together. This is the original base by Joseph Merlin, and it was very influential on the Empire State Building. These huge attached, semi-attached pillars were very influential on the facade of the Empire State Building. And then you get this giant pylon that comes through, and you can see it through the base windows at street level. They gutted the entire building. It's just the shell of the base. So if you go inside, you can see the beams that hold up the tower.
The whole tower just comes right down through the atrium, and it's a multi-story atrium with a marvelous sloping waterfall with a diagonal escalator going right up through the thing. Unfortunately, the public is not permitted to go to the next level, but you can go into the street level and see and get a very great sense of what that base looks like now. And it's very impressive. It's one of the most impressive lobbies, I think, in the city, certainly of the New York. It's got some very interesting art piece on the base of the tower wall that you go up through. And as I said, this sloping water works is another example of the work of the architect James Carpenter. And it's the only time that I've seen anything like that is at the government buildings in Canberra in Australia, where they have a big sloping body of water. And what they've done is that they put interruptions in this to prevent the water from traveling as fast as it would without these interruptions. And yet it still has the feeling of almost a regular surface of uninterrupted water, which would defy gravity. But it's well worth taking a visit to.
Have you photographed the IA symbol?
I have. Oh, yeah, many times. Yeah. You're going to ask me about lighting?
No, that must be difficult to get a close look.
Well, the main difficulty was the fact that the best views of it, in my opinion, are from the northwest.
On West.
Yeah, northwest side. And the very best angles are right from the middle of the roadway.
Yeah.
And so my solution to that was to put my camera on a tripod and wait until the traffic light just south of the building, and wait until the traffic comes to a halt, go into the middle of the highway and shoot as many exposures before hitting the traffic light, and then whiz back. And I got some pretty nice shots.
So what do you think of that?
I like it a lot. It's a complete departure for Frank Gehry. Everybody was expecting a folded metal building, and he came up with a completely new vocabulary as far as I'm concerned. I like that smoked glass, and and I particularly like the building at dusk because you get a combination of the facade, especially at the dusk, with the setting sun. You've got a good day there, reflected in the facade, and then as the lights come on inside, you know, the changes by the it's very, and it's a very interesting shape too. It doesn't meet the requirements of a skyscraper, but it's certainly not a dull building. And I much prefer it, frankly, to the new Jean Nouvel building, just to the north of it, which has been highly praised, but I don't like that as well as 40 Mercer Street, which is another Jean Nouvel building put on the east side. You can see I'm very many now.
That's good.
You made a comment about one building in particular that you didn't like at first, but warmed up to and kind of grew on you. Do you think that's true of people generally as the longer a building stands there? I argued that that was true of the Twin Towers.
Yeah, I think that you get used to architecture, it becomes familiar even if it's shocking at first. I think that was very true at the old World Trade Center, where people were just stunned by it at first, but there's a lot of sentimentality about it now.
Yeah, but I think that it's not, I don't think it was just that, because when those Twin Towers were built, that was before they developed the whole World Convention Center.
Right.
And what the World Trade Towers lacked was any sort of base. I mean, they came down and they just stood on a flat, sort of endless plaza. And you felt that if you pressed a button, they would just disappear. And or that they got extruded somehow. But once they built the World Financial Center, how these buildings there was an interesting dialogue, especially when you saw it from further away, that sort of gave the building a context which it originally lacked. And I think that contributed largely to it. It did improve with age, up to it. So, yes.
Yes, you showed a picture of the old RCA building.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about that and compare it to the bank. I think the address is Point Exchange, any place down here. Just in how similar they are, they seem to be the same form, but for very different clients.
Which is
20 Exchange Place is that sort of two-tone building
The
that's
Citibank,
down just off.
Citibank Farmers Trust.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
Farmers Trust.
Yeah, that was another example of great expressionism. Those huge heads you see along the corners are actually air vents. So they're again, was an example of an architect saying that what he's doing is purely functional. You get this gracious.
The same architect.
Oh,
GE and Citibank Farmers Trust are both across the front.
oh yes.
Yeah, there was a writer named Daniel Burnham did a book for yeah, but it was called Skyscraper Rivals.
Yeah,
And that was one of the three buildings. 40 Wall Street, 70 Pine Street, and 20 Exchange Place, which were all very much in contention, or they were very competitive, all built around the same time.
I just think, I guess my point is that I think it's interesting, because to me, I think of them as the exact same form, very similar. But one is for a bank, and you get this feeling of a very secure bank, with those big heads that you were talking about, guards over the bank, versus the RCA building is, it's media, and you've got all this excitement going on in the building.
Well, the tops of the two buildings are very different. I suppose the basic form may not be as different as it might be, but
Another great thing on the top of that bank building are the coins from countries that we did trade with, agricultural trade, and there's one for Cuba.
Yeah. Yeah, the lobby incidentally of 20 Exchange Place, very interesting detail. There's a, I think there's still a bank building in there. It's got a marvelous entry. It's well worth taking a look at. The other thing, if you're down that neck of the woods, and you haven't been into it, at the top of Wall Street is one Wall Street. And if you go in there, there's a bank in there, and the lobby of that bank, the ceiling on it is the second biggest mosaic ceiling in the world. And it's all done gold, and it's unbelievable. Really, really.
We have a lovely rendering of it in that case right there.
Oh,
So,
really? Yeah.
this might be a good time
Okay.
to ask individual questions while you have a glass of wine or water and help purchase a book and get it inscribed by the author and a photographer. So